Book 1 of Cosmas, a monk. Against those who, while wishing to profess Christianity, think and imagine, like the pagans, that the heaven is spherical. As many as ardently desire true knowledge, and are lovers of the true light, and earnestly endeavor to become fellow citizens of the saints in the age to come, who regard the Old and New Testament as in reality divine scripture, who are obedient to Moses and the Christ, who follow out to the end of the principles they have adopted, who acknowledge that the world was produced by God out of mere nothing, and who believe that there is a resurrection of men and a judgment, and that the righteous shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. All these carefully examine the divine scriptures all throughout, to see whether in Moses, who wrote the account of the creation, and in other prophets, they contain descriptions of the places and figures of the whole creation, among which is indicated also the position of the kingdom of heaven, which the Lord Christ promises God will give to righteous men. And when they find the Old and New Testaments to be in mutual harmony, they abide therein firmly grounded and immovable, in nothing confounded by their adversaries. But those, on the other hand, who prank themselves out in the wisdom of this world, and are self-confident that by scholastic reasoning they can comprehend its figure and position, scoff at all divine scripture as a mass of fables, stigmatizing Moses and the prophets, the Lord Christ and the apostles as idle babblers, and given over to vain delusions, while with supercilious airs, as if they far surpassed in wisdom the rest of mankind, they attribute to the heavens a spherical figure and a circular motion, and by geometrical methods and calculations applied to the heavenly bodies, as well as the abuse of words by worldly craft, endeavor to grasp the position and figure of the world by means of the solar and lunar eclipses, leading others into error while they are in error themselves, in maintaining that such phenomena could not present themselves if the figure was other than spherical. But concerning these matters we shall not enter into any discussion just at present, since those persons sufficiently confute the one the other. But those who wish to profess Christianity while wishing at the same time to bedeck themselves with the principles, the wisdom, and the diversity of the errors of this world, and contend that one thing and another should be accepted, seem to differ nothing from a shadow which exists while intermediate body from which it is projected is in light, but which cannot exist when that body is not in light, nay, is even obliterated by the light when the body is illuminated all round. It is against such men my words are directed, for divine scripture denounces them, as of old it denounced the strangers sojourning in Samaria, because they feared God and burned incense and offered worship on the high places, which one to call such men double-faced, he would not be wrong, for Look you, they wish both to be with us and with those that are against us, thus making void their renunciation of Satan, whom they renounced in baptism, and again running back to him. Now such men cannot be with us at all, but they occupy a middle position, like empty houses standing up in the air, without having either foundations in the earth below or anything from above to hold them fast. For while they have as yet scarcely come by their principles, they set about destroying them, and before they have yet destroyed them, they show that their end is unaccomplished, as they stand firm neither on the one side nor the other, but rather laugh at everyone, and are themselves laughed at by all. In the first place, then, when arguing with them about the spherical figure, we showed that this figure was not possible, and was indeed quite inconsistent with the nature of things. Certain of them say that the heaven is a body consisting of 4 elements, but some later on supercilious reconstructed it with an additional 5th new element, though formally its essential construction comprised only 4 elements, for they saw at a glance that the heaven could not revolve if it was composed of these, but herein again they are found to be blind, even when they think that those who are sharp-sighted do not see, for since the heaven is seen to be of sundry and diverse colors, whence a power to produce heat and cold seem to be inherent in them, they say that the eyes of all are deceived by reason of their immense distance. Well, then let any one of them who so wishes come forward and tell us, why do the stars, which according to you are evidently fixed in an immovable sphere, not apparently differ in color and size, though their distances from us are seen to be unequal, if the center of the earth be the point from which our eyes are directed towards them? And how is it that many of the fixed stars are equal and like to the planet we call Mars, to which a lower sphere has been assigned, and how do we in like manner see not a few of them to be like the planet Jupiter? But further, we do not even see the heaven itself to be one and the same color. For if it were asked, from whence can we surmise that the cloud-like concretions which you have named the galaxy, and which you have designated simply because of the difference of their color, have derived their peculiar appearance, while the surface on which the ray of vision strikes is uniform? And if I replied that these were proofs of the composition and mixture of different elements, no one, I apprehend, would dare to contradict me, even though he were a lover of falsehood, and much less if one of those who always assign the foremost place to truth. Now if the heaven has been constituted not of one single element endowed with a circular motion of its own, but the mixture of the 4 elements, that it cannot well revolve. For it has been said that it must either be moved downward if the heavy element preponderate, or be carried upward if the opposite light one prevail, or must be stationary when no element is preponderant. This is certainly obvious to everybody, for no one would admit that he has ever seen the heaven move either upward or downwards. It must be allowed, therefore, that if it is firmly fixed, But should they ask whence are these motions that differ from the rest in an element that is simple and without qualities, since they say, and not untruly, that those bodies which they call planets revolve oppositely to the universe, and if in like manner they say that the revolution is accomplished in certain times which the Creator has fixed, it is evident that they do not even deny that the planets advance from the east. Then, being mazed with perplexing doubts, as usually happens to those who shrink from the truth, they say on finding no way of escape, that the stars make retrogressions and pauses. But tell me, ye souls that are so ingenious in trying to tying and untying knots, if from their very nature they have motions, how comes it that they stand still, for nothing that can thwart them enters in an element into their natural constitution? And tell me this besides, that is the force, or what the necessity which imposes on them the contrary motion. And here let no one tell me that it is an ocular deception, for it is no minute distance to which they advance, seeing that they are often observed to shift their places from a sign of the zodiac that is in the rear to one in front. But what must we say of our opponents when passing on to the operations of the stars themselves? They reach the very height of absurdity, all unconscious that they themselves stand still or move backwards, and are but a sorry set of good-for-nothing rascals. Now, anyone would say that the star previously seen in Aries, but at present appearing in Pisces, was not in the house of Mars, but in that of Jupiter, and that it makes movements not such as they babble about when it is in Aries, but those which are ascribed to it in its transit through Pisces. But if they do not admit to retrograde motion of the planets, which is apparent, whence then or therefore is their course in both directions? They will perhaps in reply assign as the cause those invisible epicycles which they have assumed as vehicles on which, as they will insist, the planets are borne along but they will be in no better case from this invention. For we shall ask, why have they need of vehicles? Is it because they are incapable of motion? Then, if so, why should you assert them to be animated, and that too even with souls more than usually divine? Or is it that they are capable? The very idea is, methinks, ridiculous. And why have not the moon and the sun their epicycles? Is it that they are not worthy on account of their inferiority? But this could not be said by men in their sober senses. Was it then from the scarcity of suitable material the Creator could not construct vehicles for them? On your own head let the blasphemy of such a thought recoil. Cease, O you wiseacres, prating worthless nonsense, and learn at last, though late, to follow the divine oracles and not your own baseless fancies. For tell us how ye think that the fixed stars move in an opposite direction to the universe. Is such a motion theirs only, or that of the sphere in which they are placed? Then, if it is theirs, how do they traverse unequal orbits in equal time? And how comes it that the stars in the galaxy, not one has ever gone outside of it, nor any of those outside is seen neither it or within it? But if one should say that it is the sphere which moves in the opposite direction, then it will be found that unequal orbits in equal time. And how come the stars of the galaxy has one going on the outside? But if it should say that it is the sphere which moves in the opposite direction, then it will be found that the same time it moves opposite to itself. But who can imagine a greater absurdity than this? Thus they do their best to prevent any one surpassing them in their effrontery, or rather, let me say, in impiety, since they do not blush to affirm that there are people who live on the undersurface of the earth. What then should someone question them and say, is the sun to no purpose carried under the earth? These absurd persons will, on the spur of the moment, without thinking, reply that the people of the antipodes, meaning people walking upside down on the opposite side of the sphere, are there men carrying their heads downward, and rivers having a position opposite to the rivers here, thus taking in hand to turn everything, turning everything upside down rather than to follow the doctrines of the truth, in which there are no futile sophisms, but which are plain and easy and full of godliness, while they produce salvation for those who reverently consult them. But if you would most effectually rebuke them, if you say, why does the sphere of yours not revolve from the north to the south, or from some other quarter to its opposite? And do not tell me in answer that such seemed better to the maker of the world but how can you deem that you speak consistently with the nature of things in supposing that the whole heaven is in motion, and describes a circle without supposing that outside of it there is either some other space or body, even though it were imaginary? They're talking about fake space. For it is impossible anything can move apart from the four elements, but must move either in earth, or in water, or in air, or in fire, whether it is transferred from place to place into the infinite, or whether it always revolves in the same place. But if the heaven as it revolves passes into the infinity of space, we must suppose that beyond it there is an infinite earth into which it rolls when noiselessly leaving what is behind it. But if one of the other three elements be supposed in, not one of them is the sphere adapted to roll and to rotate, nay, where is it to be shot into any of them? A whizzing noise would attend the transition. But if again it rolls and rotates always in the same spot without moving from place to place, then it must be upheld by supports like a tuner's lathe, or an artificial globe, or on an axis like a machine or a wagon. And if so, then we must again inquire by what the supports and axles are themselves upheld, and so on ad infinitum. And tell me, pray, how are we to suppose the axis passes through the middle of the earth, and of what material it consists? When these problems then concerning the nature of things are discussed, there remains the conclusion, as we said before, that the heaven is fixed and does not revolve. But even in supposing that the earth is in the middle of the universe as its center, you immediately give the death blow to your own theory when you repeat that the middle is below. For it is impossible that the same thing can at once both be in the middle and below, for the middle is the middle between up and down, or between right and left, or between before and behind. Why do you then, when belargued with difficulties, utter absurdities contrary to nature, in opposition to Scripture, for being in terror lest any one should pose you this question? How can this unspeakable weight of the earth be held suspended by the air and not fall down? And you have inverted stories of things that are not true but strange, and reversing the order of things, give out that the middle is below. So that if any should suppose that instead of the earth, fire was the middle, You would then say that the middle was above instead of below, seeing that the tendency of the fire is upward. To me, therefore, they seem to subvert the first by means of the second, and the second by means of the first. But if they say that the air, because it surrounds the earth equally on all sides, is pushed on by the universe, and that the earth remains immovable and swerves neither to the one side nor the other, why do men and the irrational animals that live on land or fly in the air not move along with it? Why all of them cleave the air in walking and traversing it, and in going on high? And not only is it incapable of resisting these, but it cannot even sustain the weight of the lightest inanimate things, such as the shortest of feathers and the smallest of straws. But all of them cut it. It is so attenuated and so rare that they outstrip it according to the force which they are propelled. How then can we revive such false theories? But should one wish to examine more elaborately the questions of the antipodes, he would easily find them to be a old wives' fable. For if two men on opposite sides placed the soles of their feet each against each, whether they choose to stand on earth or water or air or fire or any other kind of body, how would both be found standing upright? And how would both be standing upright? The one would surely be found in the natural upright position, and the other contrary to nature, head downward. Such notions are opposed to reason and alien to our nature and condition. It's being said right here, like, how can, again, I apologize, I'm not the best reader, but it's saying here, how can one person be standing on one side of the ball and the other one not stand on the other side of the ball? Of course, one or any object whatsoever opposite of another man, and surely one man has to have their head upside down and the other one would be the one standing upright. Like, it's impossible for someone to stand on the opposite side of a surface and stay there. And what is he explaining? This is at the time of when they're trying to roll out gravity, so, you know. Such notions are opposed to reason and alien to our nature and condition. And how again, when it rains upon both of them, is it possible to say that the rain falls down upon the two, and not that it falls down to the one and falls up the other, or falls against them, or towards them, or away from them? For to think that there are antipodes compels us to think also that rain falls on them from an opposite direction to ours. And anyone will, with good reason, deride these ludicrous theories, which set forth principles incongruous, ill-adjusted, and contrary to nature. And if one should examine that other sophism of theirs, namely, the earth is inflated with air, and that earthquakes occur when the pent-up air shakes the earth violently, he would be amazed at the imposture and the contradiction of their statements. For if the earth, when equally pressed by the whole air, stands unshaken and unswerving, then, when inflated, it ought to be all the heavier in that quarter, and to swerve to a side after the example of a man which they adduce. For not only does a man shake and tremble when attacked with flatulence, it goes from 17 to 20. Oh no, maybe I've been skipping pages since I was doing this. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Back to here. Alright, let's go to page 17. Sorry. And again, I'm going to leave the link to this so you can go read it yourself, because I know I am not the best narrator or reader. But I know this is truth, and I know it's important for people to see. 17. Okay, it goes to 20. So let me read from 17 to 20 from the actual book, because I have the actual book. From flatulency, but he trembles when seized with terror, and when overcome with wine, and pinched with cold, and when his blood boils with anger, and when he is old and imbecile. But when he reels under the effects of flatulency, death results. Why then does not the earth also, which according to them is inflated with air, not collapse and lose its proper place? And why again do they further say that Egypt, because its soil is porous and its furrows allow the air to escape without violent shocks, is not subject to earthquakes, but while in point of fact earthquakes have been of frequent occurrence in that country, and so violent as to overthrow cities and level them with the ground. And not only so, but even in the times of the Greeks, when Alexander and Seleucus and Antiochus and Ptolemy ruled and reigned, they had recourse to the assistance of philosophers, Aristotle and his like, and frequently gave practical effect to what they advised. And when Antioch was being founded by Seleucus and Antiochus, how was it that philosophers were not able to point out that the country there was not safe from earthquakes, but on the contrary exposed to their frequent visitations? And this we say from having seen that the city is being repeatedly overthrown by earthquakes, and not Antioch only, but Corinth also, which has close at her hand the mob of the philosophers. But if we should care to examine yet another of their opinions, that in which they say and try to prove by illustrations, the rain is produced from vapor drawn up by heat into the atmosphere, in the same way say they as the bath draws up vapor from the heat and lets it fall in drops, and just as a cupping glass draws up moisture by means of tow and fire, so too does the sun draw up vapor, and in course of time lets it fall in dropping whence rain is produced. One cannot but marvel at such wisdom, as this, imposing as it does by its spaciousness upon the multitude. That word is Speciousness, upon the multitude. For since the bath derives its heat from above, from since the bath derives its heat from not from above but from below, how can it be said to draw up and neither to push up? So too in the case of a cauldron, it receives its heat not from above but from below, and in both instances the vapors are pushed up by the heat, and in the rebound due in the one case to the roof and in the other to the lid, they fall in drops. Similar is the case of the cupping glass, which did not this instrument itself constrain nature and suck up moisture, would never have sucked it up at all. No, not even if the fire and tow had been applied 10,000 times over. But further, when one thrusts a damp faggot into the fire, moisture is to such a degree pushed by the heat that both moisture and smoke are expelled from the other end of the faggot. And when one has kindled a fire on the ground, he sees the moisture in the faggots conveyed upward by the smoke, not drawn up by what is above, but pushed up by the heat of the fire. Nay, more, if one washes a garment and spreads it on the ground, and if when it has been dried by the sun he lifts it up, and he will find moisture which has been expelled by it by the heat impressed on the ground in the very shape of the garment. In like manner, if one places a hot piece of meat, in the shape of a garment. In like manner, if one places a hot piece of meat on a trencher, he will see the moisture discharged in both directions, both upwards and downwards, the heat being intermediate, for above he sees the steam mounting upwards, and below he sees the trencher bathed in moisture, on which the meat has impressed its own shape, whence it appears that heat does not draw up, as these sages tell us, but rather pushes up. But when we propose a new question to them, why is it that in the Thebaid, where the ground is parched up by the heat, the moisture is not drawn up into it? Rain for that is not drawn up and turned into rain for that country. They defend themselves by saying that it is moderate and not an excessive heat that causes the drawing up. To this we shall give a very summary reply. And how happens it, we shall ask, that beyond Thebaid in Ethiopia, there where the heat is far greater, there are frequent copious downfalls of rain. And how can they say those many and tip-top wise men, that the sun has the power of drawing upwards, and assert also quite confidently that in the course of his revolution he becomes heated by friction, while they will not entertain the supposition that the heat is in him by nature, but more when they allow that the air is moist and hot, that need have those wiseacres to resort to sophistry and say that the moisture is drawn up from elsewhere, when up above they have the heat and moisture at the same spot. But if one should ask them about one particular element, as it is in itself, should ask them to show its distinctive quality, and they immediately find themselves at a loss, and attribute two qualities to one single element, and say earth is dry and cold, water cold and moist, air moist and warm, fire warm and dry, so that being beleaguered with difficulties, they assign 8 qualities to the 4 elements, but at times they say that all qualities exist in each of the elements. Once more, therefore, they contradict their own words by ascribing not 4 but only 2 qualities to each of the 4 elements. I marvel, according to the most excellent men, when they attribute to water coldness and humidity, and to the air humidity and heat. How do they say that water, that is, the cold and moist, congeals and becomes ice in wintertime? Where from comes that extreme cold which converts it into ice? From if they shall say that the departure of the sun naturally produces this effect, why does it not produce the same effect on the air, which is naturally warm, and at the same time moist, but makes it, on the contrary, extremely cold? And how does the cold itself, that is water, not make the air, that is moist, freeze, but on the contrary, it is the latter which makes the former freeze, as we actually see. Now, though I have many things more to say about this question and the examples which they erroneously adduce in favor of their view of it, I curb myself, for I feel ashamed of the foolishness of what is said by them, and consider what has already been said on the subject sufficient. There is, however, another sophism held by these wise men, which I am especially anxious to deal with, and will forthwith proceed to discuss. They say that the heaven which they call a body contains the whole world, and stoutly maintain that outside of it nothing whatsoever exists. And yet they define angels and demons with souls, which are part of the world as uncircumscribed, neither containing the heaven nor contained by the heaven, nor not understanding what they say. Since that which neither contains nor is contained is never by any possibility seen among things that are. If then these things be as they say, let them tell us with respect to their own soul whether it is or is not. And if they say it is not, then to their own shame and disgrace they assume themselves to be soulless, But if they say that it exists, let them tell us whether it is in them or is not in them. If they reply that it is not in them, they answer not less shamelessly and foolishly than they did before. But if they reply that the soul is in them, we must ask them a further question. As the body is circumscribed by the heaven, why is not the soul also circumscribed? And if they say it illuminates the body without being circumscribed along with it, the question arises, where is it when it illuminates the body? Since it is impossible that being a created thing, it should not exist with things created. And if they say it exists somewhere within the heaven, then it is again circumscribed by the body itself of the heaven, although it was represented by them as uncircumscribed. But if they make it exist outside the heaven, they in the first place confute themselves. In the next place, it will either be in a part of the heaven and occupy but a small part of it, or it will be in the whole of it, in which case it will circumscribe the heaven and will be found having form like a bodily substance. And this a spherical from embracing the sphere. But if again they say that as being uncircumscribed, it pervades all things both within and without, let them not blind themselves to the fact that they are both introducing polytheism and imagining an equality with God, for this property pertains to none except the uncreated deity who created and fashioned the universe. So then, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, as says the blessed Paul the Apostle, having changed the glory of the uncircumscribed deity to their own created souls, thus appropriating themselves to the glory due to God. They must therefore in their way be avoided, for saith the Apostle, from those turn away who hold an outward form of godliness, but deny the power thereof. Wow. So, again, I'm going to leave the link in the bottom so that people can read this on their own. And while I'm actually going through all this, let me show you the contents and the books. This is the book I was telling you all about before, and it has a book on Atlantis, and someone requested that I post something about Atlantis, so I'm going to read that, and I'll leave a link so that if you want to read it yourself, you can do that. Okay, so it's Book 1, The Places and Figures of the Universe, the hearsay of affirming that the heavens are spherical and that there are antipodes, pagan errors as to the causes of rain and of earthquakes. Book 2, The Position, Figure, Length, and Breadth of the Earth, the Site of Paradise, the Greek inscriptions at Adul extract from Ephorus, the ancient empires, the fall of man and its effect on the angels, the circumscription of angels, demons, and souls. Book 3, The Tower of Babel, the mission of Moses to the Israelites, comments on his history of the creation of the world, the conversion of the nations to Christianity, a recapitulation of the views advanced, theories of eclipses, doctrine of the sphere denounced, description of the tabernacle patriarchs, prophets who predicted the coming of Christ and the future state and agreement of these wise apostles. So remember, this is during the time when, right after the Greeks had already conquered and everything, and they started implementing all of their philosophies of the spherical Earth and the planets and the zodiac, and continuing the worship and or immortalizing of the Greek and Roman mythology gods and stuff like that. But remember, there's truth to everything, so he was fighting the fight of, hey, why are you guys trying to say we live on a ball when we've known, and this was pretty close to those times, we've always known that it's not a ball. Why are you trying to implement that into society? That's how long this argument has been going on, guys. Because when this is unnatural. It's unnatural to believe that you live on a sphere spinning around doing all sorts of crazy things without any of the planets coming closer or further away. In all your sci-fi shows, they always show you the planets coming closer and closer and then farther away, and 8 different moons and all this other stuff. Our anomalies, if we were spinning radically out of control with all sorts of different orbits and things coming closer to us and further away, our anomalies and the things that we see in the sky should not be anywhere near as consistent as they are. They're so consistent that they've never changed for thousands of years. What do you know? What do you know? What do you know? They've been recording it since these times. And remember, this is translated from the Greek. All right, from that time. Okay, so here we go. So they were already on the Roman calendar. They were already on, I think, when this was being written, when he was doing all this, I think they were in an 8-day week. Anyways, doesn't matter. Book 5 or Book 6, The Size of the Sun and Dissertation on the Two States. Book 7, The Duration of the Heavens. Okay, so that's the chapter about the firmaments above us and everything like that. I think that's really interesting. I mean, what else could we really hope for in this book to learn about his position way back then and how he was trying to combat the conflict? I think this is so interesting. But somebody else should do the reading. Like, somebody else needs to do a really good reading of this. There's I'm not gonna try to get anybody to pay to anybody to do it anymore, because it's more important that if you want to seek truth, that you just take the time to just go for it, just look for it, and he'll show it to you. And this is what happened with me. Like, I've already read most of this book, but this book is beyond, like, I already know. So to me, it's like, I don't really have to read all this, because I already know. I believe it. I believe everything is the way it's described to us. But I think in the right hands, like, if Matt, I believe that's his name, from Kingdom in Context, if he got a hold of this book and he went through it and read it and explained everything to you guys, I think we would, I think this would be very beneficial to their project that they have of building the firmament and all that stuff. Even though the Holy Scriptures already give them enough of description for them to put it together, I just think that what this guy has to say is very interesting. Okay, so then we see book number 8 interpretation of the Song of Hezekiah, the retrogression of the sun, ancient dials, like sundials. If you haven't looked into sundials, that's really, really important for you to see, to know about where you live. Predictions referring to Cyrus. Book 9, courses of the sun and moon and their heavenly bodies, their movements affected by the angels. Book 10, passages from Christian fathers affirming the author's views. Book 11, describing certain Indian animals and plants and of the island of Topography. And Book 12, Old Testament narratives confirmed by Chaldean, Babylonian, Persian, and Egyptian records, the island Atlantis. That's a big one. Okay, so I'm going to go start trying to find that one to read. And if you don't want to listen to me, you can easily just go ahead and look it up and read it. But spread the word. This is like fresh meat for the truther community. I don't recall anyone speaking about this yet or having referenced it. So let's see what this does. Hopefully this type of information helps to instill your faith and belief in what you've been pursuing, because it is very important to know where you are and where you live. Very, very important. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop this recording and do the other one.